Hi guys, it's Angie with Fun Endeavors Tie-Dye Lab. Today, let's make a gravity dyed geode shirt. For this shirt, I'm only going to do a single geode on the front lower portion of the shirt. So I'm going to use a washable marker and I'm going to make a mark kind of where I want the center of the geode to be. It's obviously not going to be this shape, but this will allow me to keep track of where I want the center to be as I'm tying the rest of the shirt. I'm going to pinch that center area, lift the shirt up off the table, kind of give it a shake because I'm only grabbing that top layer of fabric. Then I'm going to slide my hand down to where I want this geode to end, and I'm going to start tying my rings from the outside going in. I'm only going to tie one geode, and so the part that you see to the right of where I'm tying the geode, all that part is going to be just left to gravity dye. And as I'm tying the rings for the geode, I'm really going to try to mess up the fabric. I'm going to kind of fold it, mess with it a little bit, rough it up. I want it to be just as messy as I can get it, actually. And as I get closer to the center of the geode, I'm going to start pushing the fabric down in the center. Like I said, trying to mess that area up because I really do want it to look as random as possible. If you're a messy tyer when you do tie-dye, geodes are a great design for you because the messier you tie them when you actually tie them, the better I think they end up looking and the more natural they look. So when I get to the center portion of the geode, I'm actually going to divide it into a couple different sections. I'm going to just take my sinew down through the fabric, kind of isolate off one area, tie little rings going out to the edge, and then wind my sinew back down those rings and tie the other side. You can just tie one center if you want to, or you can do what I'm doing and tie multiple centers. I'm using sinew to tie this geode with because the sinew is wax coated. So when I wrap the sinew around a couple of times, then pull it really tightly, it tightens down on itself and it forms pretty much a barrier that won't allow liquid underneath there. So where I tie those rings, that part is going to remain white, or at least it's going to have a definition line in it. Now I'm going to place this geode aside. I'm going to straighten it out just a little bit, place it aside, and allow it to dry out completely. I think I get better color saturation in the center of a thick fold like a geode if I wait and dye it when it's completely dry. If you'd like a little more information about this topic, I have a blog post out on my website that addresses this, and I have a link to my website down below this video in the description. Okay, so since I'm gonna gravity dye this shirt, I've taken it outside and I have a shelving rack that I have outside underneath the trees. I'm gonna place this shirt right at the edge where the part that's gonna be gravity dyed is hanging over the edge. So to make sure the whole entire shirt doesn't fall off of my rack, I'm gonna tie a piece of kite string to the end of it, and I'm gonna attach the kite string to the other side of my rack. Then to make it a little bit easier to keep ice on the shirt, I'm going to go ahead and make myself a little bit of an ice barrier using some silicone cake molds. I'm going to wrap those around the shirt. Then I'm going to hold the cake molds up close to the shirt by attaching some wooden clothespins to my metal rack. Since the shirt is completely dry, I'm going to start by spraying some soda ash solution on the shirt so that the dye will stick a little bit better. For this geode, I've chosen various shades of kind of teal and purple. And I'm going to try to apply these dyes pretty randomly. I am going to apply the dye on the lines, in the sections, across sections. I really want it to be as random as possible. So because I am going to apply the dye as randomly as I can, I'm going to apply quite a bit of dye on every section because I want to be able to just add more ice to the shirt and not have to like flip the shirt over and add more dye to the other side. It would be very difficult to match this pattern if I tried to apply dye on the other side. So I want to just add plenty of dye the first time and keep forcing the dye down through the shirt by applying more ice. So let me tell you the colors that I'm using. The teal colors that I'm using are Seafoam from Custom Colors, Caribbean Blue from Custom Colors, Teal Blue from Dye Spin, and Heads or Teals from Dharma. Heads or Teals was a muck dye color that's no longer available, but you can either just choose another teal color to substitute or just leave that one out. Then the purples that I'm using are lilac, hydrangea, imperial purple, and eggplant, which are all Dharma Trading Company colors, and royal purple from Dye Spin. If you don't have all of those colors, or you don't have any of those colors, then just choose other colors that you like. You can do this with any color that you want to. With a few of the colors, I'm placing them down just a little bit below that last sinew line. That is intended to try to get the colors to flow down the shirt. So I'm going to put several colors just outside of the last sinew line. So on the day when I applied the dye to the shirt, it was a little bit windy. So I do have some speckles of dye already falling down to the shirt portion below, which I've said this before, but if you are not a fan of dye speckles, then gravity dye is probably not for you. At least not gravity dye that's done outside. I know I've mentioned it several times, but where I live, it is always windy. And so speckling is just going to happen. I've learned to live with it and actually kind of embrace it as being part of the design. Sometimes it kind of adds some fun dimension to the shirts that I gravity dye. They definitely all end up looking very unique. Once I have the dye on the shirt, I'm going to add an additional sprinkle of dry soda ash over the top because I'm going to end up adding a whole lot of ice to this shirt to force the dye down through the shirt and to force the dye to go all the way down to the edge of the fabric. And I want to make sure I don't rinse out all the original soda ash from the soda ash soak because this dye needs soda ash to raise the pH so that the dye will properly bond with the fabric. For the first few rounds of ice, I used some pretty large ice cubes, which I make in silicone ice molds. Before I just left the shirt alone, I went ahead and sprayed the portion of the shirt where I had some of the speckling with some soda ash solution to kind of try to dissolve just a little bit of that speckling. Then I just left the shirt alone and allowed the ice to melt. And it was really hot outside the day that I did this shirt, so the ice melted rather quickly. And I came back and added several more layers of ice cubes like this until I finally decided to go ahead and take off the ice barrier that I made and add on some pretty large chunks of ice, which I made in pencil containers, which I purchased from the Dollar Tree dollar store. They're intended to put in your desk and hold pencils. They work perfectly for a lot of these gravity dyes and incline dyes that I do. I've included a lot of photos so you can see what the shirt looked like as the ice melted and it ran down through the shirt. I had just a couple of areas that I was having a problem with getting saturated, which were down in the gravity portion of the shirt. So I came back in with a little bit more of the soda ash solution and I sprayed that in that area just to try to dampen it enough to kind of promote the dye flowing into that area. When you're doing gravity dyes outside, you want to make sure that the shirt doesn't dry out. Whenever the shirt dries out, the dye will quit bonding with the fabric. So you can take a little bit of soda ash solution and spray the shirt if you want to, or especially the part that's hanging down, the part that you're gravity dyeing. That tends to dry out more quickly in the wind and in the heat. So I added the last layer of ice to the top of this shirt when it was just about dark outside. So I left the shirt outside overnight. Of course, it cooled off a little bit and the gravity dyed part was damp enough I wasn't concerned about drying out. But then in the morning, I took the shirt, placed it down inside of a container that had a rack in the bottom, placed the lid on the top, and left the shirt outside in the heat. I left the shirt for probably about 24 hours before I began rinsing it. To rinse the shirt, I took it to my utility sink and I started rinsing it in cold water to rinse out the soda ash. As you can see, it looks like I have color all the way through the fabric, so I have color all the way out to the outer edges of the gravity dyed portion. I went ahead and took off the kite string and then I warmed the water up to hot and continued rinsing in hot water to try to rinse out the excess dye that didn't bond with the fabric. I also went ahead and untied the sinew, And then instead of just continuing to rinse for a long time, I soaked the shirt by running some really hot water in my utility sink, adding some Blue Dawn dish soap to the water, placing the shirt inside, and just allowing it to soak. When the water cooled off, I changed it out, and I continued that soaking process until my water was remaining almost clear. Then I placed the shirt in my washing machine along with some Dharma's professional textile detergent, and I washed it using a hot water cycle. And after the shirt was washed, dried, and ironed, this is what it looks like. Okay, so what do you guys think? I think this one looks really cool. I really like this color combination. However, I'm going to use this shirt kind of as a teaching tool. I added a lot of ice. And so I think it dulled my colors just a little bit. They're not quite as dark and bright as they would be if I wouldn't have added as much ice, or if I would have gone back in and added a little bit more soda ash, maybe. I think it was just the quantity of ice. And I kept adding the ice because I wanted the dye to go all the way out to the outer edges of the shirt. So for me, if I were to do this one over, I think I would have dampened the lower area, the gravity dye part a little bit more, and then I wouldn't have had to add as much ice to get the dye all the way out to the outer edges. But don't get me wrong, it's not light by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, it is still a very bright and vibrant shirt, but I did use some really dark purples like eggplant, and I'm not finding that one being quite as dark as it probably should have been if I hadn't added as much ice. My blues too went a little bit more blue instead of staying teal. I do have a few areas out on the outer part of the geode that have some yellow in them and are showing some hints of more of a teal color. But for the most part, most of my teals kind of went a little bit more blue. The one weird thing that I do have on the shirt is I have kind of a blob of purple up on one shoulder. And I don't know if that was from maybe speckles, a little bit of dye falling down there, or if that's just the way the dye streaked down there. I suspect it's probably a chunk of dye fell down in that area. I don't quite remember. And then I think that the back looks really cool too. The way the dye flowed on the back of the shirt, I think that looks really cool and interesting. I do have some speckles on the shirts out on that one sleeve where I have the blob of purple. I have some little pieces of yellow and a few other speckles. I don't think it looks bad though, and I don't think that it takes away from the design. I also really like the center of the geode on this shirt. You know, I split it into two different centers, and one of them kind of ended up being more purple and one ended up being more blue. But I think it looks really cool. I like the shape of it. So overall, I really like this shirt. I think it turned out looking really cool, but what do you guys think? Please drop me some comments down below and let me know. And if you've enjoyed the video, I sure would appreciate it if you would like it and if you'd subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you'll hit the bell, you'll receive a notification whenever I upload a new video. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day.